What is up, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. You know, there's a special kind of frustration that comes from having a truly terrible boss. We're not talking about someone who's just a little demanding or disorganized. We're talking about the managers who are so arrogant, so convinced of their own genius, that they can't see the disaster they're about to create. They're the kind of bosses who believe their employees are just interchangeable cogs in a machine, easily replaced and barely worth acknowledging. But every now and then, one of those cogs turns out to be the linchpin holding the entire multi-million-dollar engine together. Today, we're diving into a collection of epic stories about employees who were pushed too far. These aren't tales of screaming matches or dramatic walkouts. Oh no, these are stories of beautiful, cold, calculated revenge. The kind of revenge that comes not from breaking the rules, but from following a boss's stupid, short-sighted orders so perfectly, so precisely, that it brings their whole world crashing down around them. We're talking about catastrophic financial losses, career-ending embarrassments, and the kind of corporate karma that is just so satisfying to watch unfold. So grab your popcorn, because it's time to see what happens when bad bosses play stupid games and win some incredibly expensive prizes. All right, let's kick things off with a question. Have you ever felt like you were the only person at your job who actually knew what was going on? Like if you took a sick day, the whole place would just grind to a halt. Our first storyteller was in that exact position. He was the literal wizard behind the curtain for a flagship client, the only one who knew the secret spells to keep a multi-million-dollar contract running. But when it came to his paycheck, his boss seemed to think he was just an intern. This is the story of what happens when a company learns the hard way what the term irreplaceable really means. For the better part of a decade, my world revolved around a single piece of software. I was an IT specialist for a mid-sized tech services company, and my specific, non-negotiable role was to be the caretaker, the guardian, and the sole whisperer to a custom-built system we managed for our biggest client. Let's call the client Megacorp. Now, when I say custom-built, I want you to picture something cobbled together in the early 2000s, a Frankenstein's monster of code written by people who had long since left the company. There was no manual. There were no training documents. The only guide that existed was stored in my brain, built up over years of late nights, frantic weekend calls, and deciphering error messages that looked like ancient hieroglyphs. This software wasn't just some minor tool. It was the central nervous system for a huge part of Megacorp's logistics. It managed their inventory, their shipping schedules, their billing, everything. And the contract to manage this beast was worth a cool $4.5 million a year to my company. For years, I was the guy. If the system hiccuped at 3 a.m. on a Sunday, my phone rang. If a new feature needed to be implemented, I was the one who had to dive into the spaghetti code and figure out how to do it without the whole thing collapsing. I didn't mind the work, honestly. I liked the challenge, and I took a certain pride in being the master of this arcane machine. The problem was, my salary didn't reflect any of that. I was making about $60,000 a year. It wasn't a bad living, but for the level of responsibility I had, and looking at what other specialists in the field were making, I was being criminally underpaid. Every year, like clockwork, I'd walk into my boss's office for my annual review. Let's call him Gary. Gary was the quintessential non-technical manager. He wore suits that were slightly too shiny and used business jargon like he was playing buzzword bingo. He saw it not as a skilled profession, but as a utility, like the electricity or the plumbing. You only noticed it when it wasn't working. My first few years, I asked for a raise politely. I'd present my case. Gary, the Megacorp contract is our most profitable one. My role is critical to maintaining it. The market rate for this kind of specialized work is significantly higher. And every year, Gary would give me that sympathetic but powerless manager smile and feed me a line about budgets. "Listen, I hear you," he'd say, leaning back in his chair. "You're a rock star, but my hands are tied. The higher-ups have frozen salaries this year. We just don't have it in the budget. Year after year, it was the same story. Tough quarter, company-wide belt tightening. Maybe next year. After about the fourth year of this, I started getting more assertive. I laid out the numbers, the risk. Gary, you understand that if I leave, there is nobody else who can do this, right? The learning curve isn't a curve, it's a vertical wall. It would take someone a year, maybe more, to get up to speed, assuming they didn't quit in frustration first. This is when his tone shifted from fake sympathy to outright arrogance. He saw my statement not as a professional risk assessment, but as a threat. "Is that what you're saying?" he'd reply, his eyes narrowing. "Because it sounds like you're trying to hold the company hostage. Nobody is irreplaceable. We have procedures. We have documentation." He was bluffing, and we both knew it. The documentation was a 3-page Word document I wrote 5 years ago that was so out of date it was basically fiction. But he had the power and I had a mortgage. So I'd retreat, swallow my frustration and get back to work, a little more resentful each time. The final straw came during my 8th year at the company. I was now a senior specialist, at least in title. My salary had crept up to maybe $65,000 after a couple of meager cost-of-living adjustments. I had decided this was the year I would make my final stand. I spent a week preparing. I gathered salary data from across the industry. I wrote a detailed report outlining my specific contributions, including a conservative estimate of the revenue I had personally saved the company by preventing system-wide failures. I walked into Gary's office, laid the folder on his desk, and said, "Gary, we need to have a serious conversation about my compensation. I am requesting a raise to $95,000. This would put me right in line with the industry average for a role with this level of singular responsibility." He didn't even open the folder. He literally pushed it back across the desk towards me. He smirked. "95,000? Are you serious? Look, I've told you before, the budget is the budget. We all have to make sacrifices. You get a steady paycheck and good benefits. For a lot of people, that's more than enough. You should be grateful for what you have." That one word, grateful, it was like a switch flipped in my brain. Grateful for the interrupted dinners, the canceled plans, the constant low-level stress of knowing I was the only thing standing between my company and the loss of its biggest client. I had been loyal. I had been a team player. I had sacrificed for years, always believing that eventually my value would be recognized. And in that moment, with that smirk on his face, I finally understood that it never would be. I looked at him, and for the first time I didn't feel angry or frustrated. I just felt calm. A strange, liberating sense of clarity washed over me. I smiled back at him, a genuine, relaxed smile. "You're right, Gary," I said, my voice even. "I completely understand." I stood up, picked up my folder, and walked out of his office. I'm sure he thought he'd won. He'd put the uppity it guy back in his place. What he didn't see was me walking back to my desk, sitting down, and pulling up my resume. I updated it with a decade's worth of highly specialized, mission-critical experience. That same afternoon, I started quietly applying for other jobs. 2 weeks later, I had an offer from another company for $90,000. It was a good offer, a great one even, but I had a different plan in mind. I accepted the offer, and the very next morning, I walked back into Gary's office and placed my resignation letter on his desk. My 2 weeks' notice. The color drained from his face. The smirk was gone, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated panic. "What is this?" he stammered. "You can't quit. We have the megacorp contract." "That sounds like a company problem, Gary, not my problem," I said, still calm. "As you said, nobody is irreplaceable." The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in corporate panic. Gary was a man possessed. First, he tried to counteroffer. Okay, you were right. We can do 80,000. "No, thank you, Gary. I've accepted another offer." 90, we can do 90. Just tell me what you want." "It's not about the money anymore, Gary. It's about respect. I'm afraid my decision is final." Then he switched to threats. He implied he'd give me a bad reference, that I was leaving the company in the lurch, that it was unprofessional. I just shrugged. Then came the begging. He assigned a junior technician to shadow me, a fresh-faced kid straight out of college, and ordered me to do a complete knowledge transfer. I complied maliciously. I gave the kid the official, useless documentation. I let him watch me work, but I didn't explain the why behind anything. I wasn't teaching him the magic. I was just letting him watch the trick. There was simply no way to distill 10 years of experience into 2 weeks, and I wasn't about to kill myself trying for a company that had undervalued me for so long. On my last day, I packed up my personal belongings, turned in my laptop and my badge, and walked out the front door into the bright, sunny afternoon. It felt incredible. I didn't look back. About 3 weeks into my new job, I got a call from an unknown number. It was the director of operations from Megacorp, the client. "Hey," he said, "I know you don't work for them anymore, but we are in deep trouble here. Our system has been down for 2 days. Your old company has sent 3 different guys over here and none of them have a clue. They're telling us it could be weeks before they have a solution. We're losing hundreds of thousands of dollars a day. Is there anything you can do to help? We'll pay you a consulting fee, whatever you want." I paused for a moment, savoring it, and then I saw an even bigger opportunity. "I'm sorry," I told him, "but my new employment contract has a non-compete clause, so I can't do any freelance work in this space. However, I am authorized to give references for my replacement if you were to, say, bring the work in-house." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then the director just said, "Send me your resume." A week later, I had a job offer from Megacorp. The position was Senior Systems Architect. The salary was $120,000 a year, plus bonuses. I would be a direct employee, managing the system I already knew better than anyone on Earth. I accepted immediately. My first act as a Megacorp employee was to formally terminate their contract with my old company, citing breach of contract due to failure to provide service. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. The loss of the $4.5 million annual contract sent shockwaves through my old company. It was their single largest source of revenue. Layoffs followed within a month. And Gary was the first to go. He was fired so fast his chair was probably still warm when security escorted him out of the building. His epic mismanagement, his sheer arrogance in believing his most critical employee was just another cog, had cost the company its crown jewel. And me, I got a $55,000 raise, a better title, more respect, and the immense satisfaction of knowing that I wasn't just a cog in the machine. I was the machine. And my old boss learned in the most expensive way possible that some people truly are irreplaceable. Wow, just wow. That is a masterclass in professional revenge. What I love about this story is that the hero didn't do anything unprofessional or unethical. He didn't sabotage anything. He just left. He calmly and rationally removed his labor from an employer who refused to value it. The entire catastrophic fallout was a direct, natural consequence of the manager's own arrogance. Gary's fatal flaw was a classic one among bad managers. He confused the role with the person. He thought the IT specialist was replaceable, failing to understand that the actual human being in that role, with his decade of unique, undocumented knowledge, was the asset. He saw a request for a fair market salary as a personal insult, a threat to his authority, rather than a simple business proposition. He thought he could call a bluff that wasn't a bluff. The company lost a $4.5 million contract not because our hero quit, but because their management culture created an environment where their most valuable player had no other choice. It's a perfect and very expensive lesson in the real cost of taking your best people for granted. Absolutely beautiful. If you thought that last story was satisfying, buckle up. We are about to escalate things significantly. Most revenge stories end with the bad guy getting fired and the hero getting a better job. But our next protagonist wasn't just content with getting even. He was playing chess while his boss was playing checkers. This is a story that starts with a corrupt manager trying to frame an honest foreman for theft, and ends, believe it or not, with that same foreman sitting in the owner's chair, holding the keys to the entire company. This isn't just getting back at your boss. This is the ultimate corporate takeover. My name is Mike, and for the longest time my life was built on concrete and rebar. I was a construction foreman and I was damn good at my job. I came up through the ranks, starting as a laborer right out of high school, learning every trade I could. I knew how to read blueprints like they were a novel, how to manage a crew to get the best out of them, and most importantly, how to do a job right safely and on time. I worked for a mid-sized, privately owned construction firm run by an old-school guy named Mr. Henderson. He was tough but fair, and he valued quality work above all else. The problem wasn't Mr. Henderson. The problem was my direct boss, the general manager of the company, a man we'll call Don. Don was the kind of guy who oozed cheap cologne and insincerity. He'd never spent a day of his life on a job site with a tool in his hand, but he walked around like he'd built the pyramids himself. He was a numbers guy, but not in a good way. His main focus wasn't on the quality of the build or the safety of the crew. It was on maximizing his own bonus and skimming whatever he could off the top. I started noticing little things. We debid a job with premium-grade lumber, but the delivery truck would show up with a lower grade. I'd flag it and Don would tell me to make it work, assuring me he got a discount he was passing on to the client. But the invoices never seemed to reflect that. Or we'd have 10 guys on the payroll for a specific job, but one of them, a specialist consultant, would never actually show up on site. When I asked, Don would wave it away. "He does his work remotely, Mike. Don't worry about it. Just sign the timesheet." It all felt greasy. I knew Don was cooking the books, finding ways to inflate costs on paper while cutting corners in reality and pocketing the difference. It went against everything I believed in. Not only was it fraud, but it was dangerous. Using cheaper materials or rushing safety protocols in construction can get people killed. I started pushing back, always professionally. I'd send emails documenting my concerns. "Don, per the attached architectural spec, we need grade A steel beams. The ones delivered are grade C. Please advise how you want me to proceed and document this change for the client." I was creating a paper trail, mostly to cover my own ass. I didn't realize at the time I was actually building a case. My pushback made Don nervous. He saw me not as a foreman doing his job, but as a threat to his little empire of graft. He started making my life difficult. My projects would suddenly find their budgets cut midstream. My best workers would be reassigned to other sites without my approval. He was trying to make me look incompetent, to create a narrative that I couldn't manage my jobs effectively. It was petty, but it was escalating. I knew something was coming. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday. Don called me at the end of the day and told me Mr. Henderson wanted to see us both in his office first thing in the morning. His tone was smug, almost triumphant. It set off every alarm bell in my head. I had a pretty good relationship with Mr. Henderson, but he rarely got involved in day-to-day operations unless something was seriously wrong. I knew this was Don's big move. I went home that night with a knot in my stomach. What was his play? He couldn't fire me for incompetence. My projects were still coming in on time and my safety record was spotless despite his meddling. It had to be something else, something dirtier. I thought about the recent delivery of high-end copper piping for a plumbing job we were on. It was expensive stuff, easily resold. I had a hunch. For the past 6 months, ever since I really started suspecting Don of widespread fraud, I'd been doing my own quiet investigation. Every time I sent one of those CYA emails, I printed a copy and took it home. Every time a suspicious invoice crossed my desk, I made a photocopy. I had a binder hidden in my closet, filled with discrepancies, questionable change orders, and supplier complaints. It was a thick, heavy document of Don's corruption. I decided to bring it with me to the meeting, just in case. The next morning, I walked into Mr. Henderson's office. He was sitting behind his big oak desk, looking grim. Don was in a chair opposite him, looking like the cat that ate the canary. "Mike, have a seat," Mr. Henderson said, his voice flat. I sat down. Don started the show. "Mr. Henderson," he began, his voice dripping with false regret. "As you know, I've been having some performance issues with Mike's team, but it's worse than that. We did a surprise inventory audit yesterday on the new apartment build. We're missing nearly $10,000 worth of copper piping that was signed for by Mike last Friday." He slid a folder across the desk. "Here's the delivery receipt signed by Mike, and here's the inventory count from yesterday. It's just gone. I'm afraid the only conclusion is that Mike has been stealing from the company." I felt the blood drain from my face, then return as a hot flash of anger. This was it. He had planted evidence, or more likely, arranged for a short delivery and pocketed the materials himself, leaving my signature on the full receipt. It was a classic frame-up. Mr. Henderson opened the folder and looked at the documents. He then looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Mike, what do you have to say about this?" This was the moment. I could deny it, argue about it, and it would be my word against his. Don had the paperwork. He had me cornered, or so he thought. I took a deep breath. "Mr. Henderson," I said calmly, "I didn't steal any piping, but I'm glad we're all here to talk about financial irregularities. Because while Don's been busy trying to frame me, he seems to have forgotten about the mountain of evidence of his own theft." I reached into my briefcase, pulled out my thick binder, and placed it on the desk with a heavy, satisfying thud. "You see, Don is right that there's a thief in this company. He's just got the wrong man." Don's smug expression evaporated. He looked at the binder like it was a venomous snake. "What is this?" Mr. Henderson asked, reaching for it. "That," I said, looking directly at Don, "is 6 months of documentation. It's photocopies of invoices for premium materials where we received cheap knockoffs. It's timesheets Don had me sign for ghost employees who never set foot on my site. It's copies of my emails to Don, flagging these issues, and his replies telling me to ignore them. It's a detailed record of how Don has been systematically defrauding this company and its clients out of hundreds of thousands of dollars." Mr. Henderson opened the binder. For the next 20 minutes, the only sound in the office was the rustle of paper as he turned page after page. He saw the doctored invoices, the supplier statements, the patterns, the whole sordid picture laid out in black and white. Don just sat there, sweating, his face turning a pale, sickly green. He tried to interrupt once, sputtering about lies and forged documents, but Mr. Henderson shot him a look so sharp it could have cut glass, and he fell silent. Finally, Mr. Henderson closed the binder. He looked at Don with a quiet, cold fury that was far more terrifying than any shouting. "Don," he said, his voice dangerously low, "get out of my office. Get out of my building. Your employment is terminated, effective immediately. Our lawyers will be in touch." Don, utterly defeated, stood up and practically scrambled out of the room without another word. Mr. Henderson then turned to me. He looked at me for a long moment, then down at the binder, then back at me. "You knew this was going on for 6 months. Why didn't you come to me sooner?" "Because he was the general manager," I said honestly. "It would have been my word against his, and he would have buried me. I knew I needed undeniable proof. His attempt to frame me was just the opportunity I needed to present it." He nodded slowly, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "Well, you've done this company a great service, Mike. A painful one, but a necessary one. I'm going to need you to step up. I'm making you the acting general manager while I sort this mess out." The promotion was just the beginning. I spent the next year working directly with Mr. Henderson to clean house. We rooted out the corrupt suppliers Don had been in business with. We implemented new, transparent accounting practices. We went to our clients, came clean about the material discrepancies, and made it right on our own dime. It was hard, but we rebuilt the company's reputation on a foundation of honesty. Mr. Henderson became a mentor to me. He taught me the business side of things, bidding, finance, client relations. And I taught him a thing or two about what was really happening on the ground. We made a great team. The company became more profitable than ever. About 5 years after that fateful meeting, Mr. Henderson called me into his office. He was in his late 60s and was ready to retire. He told me he'd been thinking about his legacy. He could sell the company to a big, faceless corporation, but he didn't want to see his life's work get dismantled. "Mike," he said, "this company is more yours than mine now. You saved it. You rebuilt it, so I want to sell it to you." I was stunned. I didn't have that kind of money, but he'd already thought of that. He offered me a generous owner financing deal, allowing me to buy the company from him over 10 years, using the profits of the business itself. Today, I'm not just the foreman anymore. I'm the owner and president. My name is on the trucks. I walk through Mr. Henderson's old office every morning, sit behind his old desk, and I often think about Don. His greed and corruption led him to try and destroy me over $10,000 in copper pipe. But in doing so, he handed me the opportunity of a lifetime. He didn't just get himself fired. He cleared the path for me to take his job, his boss's job, and eventually the entire company. He tried to get me fired, and I ended up owning his company. I mean, come on, does it get any better than that? This is a story that should be made into a movie. The sheer delicious irony is off the charts. The villain Don was playing for pennies, skimming off invoices, padding timesheets, all short-term, greedy little plays. Our hero, Mike, was playing the long game. He wasn't just thinking about the next paycheck. He was thinking about integrity, safety, and the right way to do things. His revenge wasn't a pre-planned hostile takeover. It was the natural outcome of his character. He gathered evidence to protect himself and the company, and in doing so, he proved his worth and his loyalty in the most dramatic way possible. This story is the ultimate testament to the idea that character is destiny. Don's corrupt character led him out the door in disgrace. Mike's honest, hardworking character led him straight to the owner's suite. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the best defense isn't just a good offense. It's a meticulously organized binder of receipts. Story 3. You want me to work on the weekend? After I quit, sure. Okay, from the epic to the elegantly simple. Our next story is a beautiful little slice of malicious compliance. It doesn't involve years of plotting or a corporate takeover, but it's just as satisfying in its own way. It's for anyone who has ever quit a job, finally escaped a terrible boss, and then had that same boss come crawling back for help. It answers the age-old question: what is the price of your expertise once you're officially off the clock? For this sysadmin, the answer turned out to be a cool $1,200 for about 5 minutes of work. I just escaped. That's the only word for it. After 3 years of working as a salaried systems administrator under the most technically illiterate boss I'd ever met, a man we'll call Phil, I had finally served my last day. Phil was the kind of manager who would forward you an email chain that was 50 messages long with the simple note "thoughts," and then get angry when you didn't magically know which of the 17 different topics in the chain he was referring to. He considered any problem that couldn't be solved by restarting a computer to be a form of personal betrayal on the part of the technology. Leaving that job was one of the happiest days of my life. I finished my 2-week notice period, did a knowledge transfer that I knew was mostly pointless because no one was paying attention, and walked out into the sweet air of freedom. I was looking forward to a weekend of blissful, uninterrupted, non-work-related existence before starting my new, much better job on Monday. That bliss lasted until approximately 10:00 a.m. on Saturday morning. My phone rang, and the caller ID showed the main number for my old office. I stared at it for a moment, a sense of dread mixing with a healthy dose of curiosity. I almost let it go to voicemail, but the temptation was too strong. I answered. "Hello, Dave, thank God." It was Phil, and he sounded like he was standing on the deck of the Titanic. Panic was radiating through the phone. Hey Phil, what's up? I asked, trying to sound casual. The authentication server is down. Nobody can log in. The whole weekend shift is just sitting here staring at their screens. It's a catastrophe. I've been trying to fix it for 2 hours and nothing's working. I could picture it perfectly. Phil, frantically clicking his mouse, probably restarting the coffee machine in the break room thinking it might be connected to the network. An internal smile started to form. "Wow, that sounds rough, Phil," I said with a tone of deep unearned sympathy. "Well, good luck with that." There was a sputtering on the other end of the line. "What? No, Dave, I need you to come in. You're the only one who knows that system." Ah, there it was. The magic words. Suddenly, I'm the only one who knows the system. Funny how he never mentioned that during my salary negotiations. A beautiful, simple, and malicious idea began to form in my mind. "Gee, Phil," I said, "I don't know. I don't work there anymore. I'm not on the payroll. I don't think I'm even insured to be in the building." "I don't care. I'll handle it. I need you here now. Name your price." Name my price. The four most beautiful words a desperate ex-boss can utter. "Well, Phil, since I'm no longer an employee, I'd have to come in as an independent contractor," I said, my voice taking on a professional, businesslike tone. "My emergency weekend rate is $300 an hour." "300 an hour? Fine, whatever, just get down here," he yelped. I wasn't done. "There's also a 4-hour minimum for any on-site call-out," I added smoothly. He paused. I could hear the gears grinding in his head as he did the math. 4 hours, but it'll probably only take you a few minutes. "That's the policy," I said, as if I were reading from a long-established company manual that didn't exist. "Portal to portal, of course. Billing starts the moment I leave my house and ends when I get back. And one more thing, Phil. I'm going to need this agreement in writing. An email from you, CCing the head of HR, confirming the rate and the minimum, before I even think about putting my pants on." The desperation in his voice was palpable. "HR, it's Saturday, they're not working." "I'm sure you can find their home number if a critical system being down is as catastrophic as you say it is," I replied cheerfully. "You've got my email address. I'll be waiting." And I hung up. I sat back on my couch, grinning from ear to ear. This was perfect. Either he says no and it's no longer my problem, or he says yes and I make a ridiculous amount of money for what I was almost certain was a ridiculously simple problem. About 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was an email from Phil, CC'd to the head of HR, whose Saturday I had now officially ruined. The email contained, in black and white, an agreement to pay me, Dave the contractor, a rate of $300 an hour with a 4-hour minimum for emergency IT support. I took my time. I had a leisurely shower. I made a fresh pot of coffee. I put on my nicest jeans. The clock was ticking, after all. My clock. I finally rolled into the office parking lot about an hour after I got the email. Phil met me at the door, practically vibrating with anxiety. "Dave, you're here. The server room is this way." "Easy there, Phil," I said, holding up a hand. "Just need to sign in first. Gotta make sure my hours are officially logged for the invoice." I sauntered over to the security desk and meticulously filled out the visitor log. Time in, 11:15 a.m. Phil led me back to the server room, a place he clearly avoided like the plague. The air was cool, the hum of the machines was familiar. I took a look at the server rack. I scanned the blinking lights. Green, 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 amber. Ah, an amber, blinking light on the network switch directly connected to the authentication server. I followed the cable from that port with my eyes. It ran from the switch down behind the rack and wasn't plugged into anything. It was just lying on the floor. Someone, most likely the overnight cleaning crew, must have bumped it with a vacuum cleaner and knocked it loose. I looked at Phil, who was staring at me with the desperate eyes of a man who had just seen a faith healer. I looked back at the cable on the floor. I could have just plugged it in and been done. But where's the fun in that? I had a 4-hour minimum to fill. So I put on a show. I walked around the server rack, stroking my chin thoughtfully. I sighed heavily. I typed a few meaningless commands into a terminal. I looked at a screen of scrolling text and said, just as I suspected. The secondary DNS resolver is failing to handshake with the primary authentication controller. Phil's eyes glazed over. Is that bad? It can be, I said gravely. Let me see if I can force a manual reset of the packet buffer. I then knelt down, theatrically reached behind the server rack where Phil couldn't see, picked up the loose network cable, and firmly plugged it back into the server's network port. On the front of the machine, a little light turned from red to a happy, solid green. I stood up, wiping imaginary dust from my hands. There, I announced. Try it now. Phil scurried over to a terminal and typed in his login credentials. His eyes went wide as his desktop wallpaper appeared on the screen. You did it. It's working. You're a genius. The whole process, from walking into the server room to plugging in the cable, took less than 5 minutes. All part of the service, I said with a humble shrug. Wow, thank you, Dave. I don't know what we would have done. I'll let you sign out now. Whoa, hold on there, Phil, I said, putting my hand up. According to the agreement, you've paid for 4 hours of my time, and I'm going to give you 4 hours. I need to run some diagnostics, monitor the system stability, and make sure the problem doesn't reoccur. It's just good professional practice. For the next 3 hours and 55 minutes, I sat at a spare desk, drank free coffee from the break room, and used their high-speed internet to browse Reddit. Every 15 minutes or so, Phil would peek his head around the corner, and I'd make sure to have a serious-looking diagnostic screen up, nodding thoughtfully. At exactly 3:15 p.m., 4 hours after I'd signed in, I stood up. I found Phil and announced that the system was stable and my work was done. I signed out, drove home, and immediately drafted an invoice. IT consulting services, 1 unit, rate $1,200. I sent it to accounts payable on Monday morning. I heard from a friend who still worked there that when the invoice landed on Phil's desk for approval, he just stared at it for a full minute, his face turning a deep shade of purple, before signing it with a deep, shuddering sigh. They paid it in full. It was, without a doubt, the easiest and most satisfying $1,200 I have ever made. This is malicious compliance in its purest, most elegant form. It's a perfect little story. The boss was in a bind entirely of his own making. He was too cheap to properly staff his department or train a backup, and too arrogant to have treated his expert well enough to ask for a favor. When the inevitable happened, he was left with no leverage. Our hero didn't haggle or argue. He simply stated his terms as a private contractor. That's the key. The moment he wasn't an employee, the entire power dynamic shifted. He was a business, and desperate people pay premium prices. The $300 hour rate with a 4-hour minimum isn't even that outrageous for emergency, weekend, specialist call-out work. He simply charged the market rate for the problem the manager created. The best part is the 5-minute fix. It underscores the value of expertise. The solution was simple, but only simple if you know what you're looking for. Phil was paying for the knowledge, not the labor, and he got a very expensive, very memorable lesson in that distinction. Sometimes, a boss's terrible idea isn't born from malice or desperation, but from a misguided attempt to be clever. They think they've found a brilliant little loophole, a clever way to shuffle numbers around on a spreadsheet to make themselves look good to their own superiors. They get so focused on the appearance of success that they completely ignore the reality of the consequences. Our next story is a masterclass in exploiting that kind of managerial vanity. It's about an employee who was asked to do some creative invoicing for his overtime, and who happily complied by legally and logically billing his company for an extra $35,000. I worked in a specialized engineering role for a large manufacturing company. My job was one of those where the standard 40-hour work week was more of a theoretical concept than a reality. We were constantly dealing with tight deadlines, unexpected equipment failures, and last-minute design changes from clients. As a result, overtime was a regular and necessary part of my life. The company knew this, and my employment contract reflected it. Even though I was a salaried employee, I was eligible for paid overtime at a rate of 1.5 times my normal pay for any hours worked over 40. It was a fair system, and it worked. My manager, let's call him Steve, was a classic middle management lifer. He wasn't a bad guy, necessarily. He wasn't overtly cruel or incompetent, but he was completely obsessed with metrics and appearances. His entire professional identity was wrapped up in how his department's budget reports looked to the vice presidents. And there was one number that drove him absolutely crazy: my overtime pay. Every month when he'd get the financial reports, he would sigh dramatically and call me into his office. "Kevin," he'd say, pointing at a line on a spreadsheet, "look at this. Your overtime is through the roof again. This makes our whole department look inefficient. The VPs see this and they think I can't manage my team's workload." "Steve," I'd reply for the dozenth time, "you know the workload is what it is. The deadlines are set by the clients, not by me. If you want the projects done on time, the overtime is unavoidable." He knew I was right, but he hated it. It was a blemish on his otherwise perfectly manicured reports. He couldn't reduce the overtime without delaying multi-million-dollar projects, but he couldn't stand the way it looked on his salaries and wages budget line. So he started looking for a way to hide it. One afternoon, he called me into his office with a glint in his eye that I'd come to recognize. It was his "I have a brilliant, poorly thought-out idea" look. "Kevin, I've figured out a solution to our overtime problem," he announced proudly. "Oh," I said, intrigued. "Are we hiring more engineers?" "No, no, something much simpler," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "From now on, I want you to keep working the overtime just like you have been, but I don't want you to log it on your official timesheet. Instead, at the end of each month, I want you to submit a separate invoice for your overtime hours." I stared at him, letting the gears in my head turn. "You want me to invoice the company as a contractor?" "Exactly," he beamed. "That way the cost won't show up as salary overtime. It'll come out of the consulting and external services budget. That budget is way bigger and nobody scrutinizes it as closely. My reports will look clean, you'll still get paid, everybody wins." I felt a slow, wicked grin spread across my face internally, but on the outside I just nodded thoughtfully. "Huh, that's an interesting idea, Steve." What Steve, in his infinite managerial wisdom, failed to grasp were the profound legal implications of what he had just asked me to do. He thought he was just moving numbers from one column to another. What he was actually doing was fundamentally changing our professional relationship. He was telling me to stop acting as an employee of the company during my overtime hours, and instead to act as an independent business providing a service. And as it happened, I had an independent business. A few years prior, I'd set up a small LLC for some freelance consulting work I did on the side. It was a legitimate, registered business entity, my own little one-man company. By asking me to invoice him, Steve had just unilaterally voided the overtime clause of my employment contract. That clause governed how Kevin the employee was to be paid. It had no bearing on how Kevin's engineering solutions, LLC, would bill a client for its services. And my LLC had its own standard rates. Rates that were, naturally, much, much higher than my simple time-and-a-half employee rate. My standard rate for emergency, after-hours engineering consulting, which is exactly what this was about triple my normal salary's hourly equivalent. This was a loophole so big you could drive a truck through it, and my own manager had just handed me the keys and a full tank of gas. "Sure, Steve," I said, trying my best to sound like a team player. "No problem at all. If it helps you with your reports, I'm happy to do it." "Excellent," he said, clapping his hands together. "See, I knew you'd understand. Just send the invoices directly to me for approval." I walked out of his office feeling like I just won the lottery. That month, I worked about 60 hours of overtime. Under my old employee agreement, that would have netted me a nice but not life-changing amount of extra pay. But this time, I didn't log a single extra hour on my timesheet. Instead, I went home, fired up my accounting software, and drafted a professional invoice from Kevin's Engineering Solutions, LLC, to my employer for professional services rendered. 60 hours of specialized engineering support at my standard contractor rate. The total was nearly 3 times what I would have normally made. I attached a detailed log of the hours worked, printed it on my LLC's letterhead, and emailed it to Steve as a PDF. A couple of days later, he came by my desk. "Hey, got your invoice," he said. "It's a bit higher than I expected." "Well, yeah," I said with a shrug. "Those are just my standard rates for my LLC. It's the same I charge all my other clients for this kind of work." He looked a little queasy, but he was trapped. He was the one who had demanded I act as a contractor. He couldn't now insist I be paid like an employee. And more importantly, the total, while high, was still just a number on an invoice from an external vendor. It wouldn't mess up his precious salary report. After a moment of hesitation, he just said, "Okay, well, I'll get it processed." And he did. The invoice went to accounts payable, and since it was an approved expense from a registered vendor, they paid it without a second thought. The money was deposited directly into my business bank account. It was beautiful. This arrangement continued for over a year. Month after month, I'd work a ton of overtime, and month after month, I'd submit a hefty invoice from my LLC. Steve kept approving them because his departmental reports looked fantastic. He was probably getting praised by the VPs for his efficiency and for keeping his salary costs under control. I was quietly making a fortune, all while following my manager's explicit instructions. The gravy train finally came to a screeching halt during the company's annual financial audit. A sharp-eyed auditor in a head office 3 states away was going through the books and noticed a major anomaly. The consulting budget for Steve's department was astronomically overspent, and a huge chunk of that spending was going to a single, recurring vendor, Kevin's Engineering Solutions, LLC. The auditor probably thought, "Who is this critical consulting firm we're paying tens of thousands of dollars to?" A quick search of the employee directory revealed that the owner of this high-priced consulting firm was also a full-time, salaried employee in the very department that was hiring him. All hell broke loose. An internal investigation was launched immediately. A very serious-looking VP and a woman from HR called me into a conference room. Steve was already there, looking like he was about to be physically ill. They laid out all the invoices in front of me. "Can you explain this?" the VP asked, his voice dangerously calm. I didn't panic. I had done nothing wrong. I calmly explained the situation from the beginning. "About a year ago," I said, "my manager, Steve, instructed me to no longer log my overtime on my timesheet. He specifically directed me to bill for those hours separately as an external contractor via an invoice. I did exactly as he asked, submitting my invoices through my registered LLC at my standard professional rates. Steve approved every single one." The VP and the HR rep looked at Steve. His face crumpled. He knew he was toast. He tried to argue that he didn't realize I was going to charge so much, that he thought I'd just bill at my old employee rate. The HR woman just shook her head. "Steve," she said, "you instructed an employee to act as an independent contractor. The moment you did that, the company's employment agreement and its overtime policies became irrelevant. He was free to charge his market rate and you approved it, for 12 straight months." The final tally was shocking even to me. They calculated the difference between what the company had paid my LLC and what they would have paid me under my old overtime agreement. The grand total came to just over $35,000, an extra $35,000 that the company had paid for absolutely nothing, other than to make Steve's spreadsheets look a little tidier. I was completely cleared of any wrongdoing. I had followed a direct order from my manager and had acted ethically and legally as a contractor. Steve, on the other hand, was fired. He was terminated for gross mismanagement and for implementing a rogue payment process that cost the company a substantial amount of money. The best part, after Steve was gone, the new manager came in, took one look at the situation and said, "Okay, this is insane. We're going back to the old way. Just log your overtime on your timesheet." The company learned a very expensive lesson that day. And I learned that sometimes the most profitable words a person can hear are, "Can you just send me a separate invoice for that?" This story is just a perfect example of corporate brainworms. The manager, Steve, was so disconnected from the reality of the work and so obsessed with the fantasy of his reports that he created this problem out of thin air. There was no issue here. The company had a fair, legal, and functional system for paying overtime. But that wasn't good enough for Steve, because it didn't look good on his little report. The protagonist's move was brilliant because it was entirely passive. He didn't argue or scheme. He just said okay and complied with an instruction that was, unbeknownst to his boss, a golden ticket. He leveraged his boss's ignorance of contract law and corporate policy to his own massive financial advantage, and he did it without breaking a single rule. It's a hilarious and satisfying indictment of middle management culture, where the appearance of efficiency is often valued more than actual, efficiency. He didn't just get revenge. He got a $35,000 bonus for his troubles. For our grand finale, we have a story that is less about corporate policy and more about pure, ice-cold personal karma. This is for anyone who has ever meticulously planned a dream vacation, saved up for months, gotten all the approvals, only to have a selfish boss snatch it away at the last second for a completely bogus reason. Our final hero found himself in that exact spot, but he had a very unique form of leverage. His boss was about to learn that when you use your power to ruin someone's personal life for your own sleazy ends, the blowback can be swift, spectacular, and leave you stranded at the airport with your entire life imploding. For over a year, I had been planning the trip of a lifetime, a 2-week tour of Italy. I'm talking Rome, Florence, Venice, the whole 9 yards. I'd saved my money, I'd practiced my terrible Italian, and I'd spent countless hours mapping out the perfect itinerary. It was more than just a vacation. It was a reward to myself for years of hard work. I submitted my time-off request a full 6 months in advance, and my boss, Richard, approved it without a second thought. "Sounds amazing, Leo," he'd said. "You deserve it." I worked as an executive assistant in a small department. Part of my job, ironically, was to handle all the travel arrangements for my team, including for Richard. Flights, hotels, rental cars. I was the guy who made it all happen. It was a position of trust, and I was good at it. I knew the booking systems inside and out, and I knew all the company's policies on travel and expenses. As my departure date got closer, my excitement was palpable. My bags were practically packed. My out-of-office message was drafted. I was 2 days away from trading my office chair for a gondola, and that's when the axe fell. Richard called me into his office. He had this somber, serious look on his face that immediately put me on high alert. "Leo, sit down," he said gravely. "I'm afraid I have some bad news. A massive, top-priority project just landed on our desk. It's an all-hands-on-deck situation, and the deadline is brutal. I'm so sorry, but I have to cancel your approved vacation. I need you here." I was floored. It felt like a physical punch to the gut. "Cancel it? Richard, it's in 2 days. Everything is booked and paid for. I've been planning this for over a year." I know," he said, oozing fake sympathy. "And I feel terrible about it. But this is a make-or-break deal for the company. We'll make sure you're reimbursed for any non-refundable costs, and you can reschedule your trip for later in the year. I have no choice." Devastated and angry, I walked back to my desk in a daze. I started the heartbreaking process of looking up cancellation policies. But as I sat there, stewing in my disappointment, something started to feel off. A make-or-break project that no one had mentioned until 48 hours before my trip. It seemed suspicious. Then my eyes landed on the travel itinerary I had pinned to my corkboard. It wasn't mine. It was the one I had booked for Richard a few weeks back. He had a very important business trip scheduled for the exact same week as my vacation. I pulled it down and looked at the details. He was flying to Milan for a conference. Milan, Italy. The gears in my brain started to turn, slowly at first and then with accelerating speed. I pulled up the booking confirmation on my computer. I saw his flight details, his hotel reservation at a ridiculously expensive 5-star hotel. And then I saw the second passenger on the itinerary. He wasn't traveling alone. He was flying with a colleague. I looked at the name. It was a woman from our marketing department. A woman who was very much not Richard's wife. Suddenly, everything clicked into place with horrifying clarity. There was no secret project. There was no corporate emergency. My boss was canceling my dream vacation to Italy so he could go on his own secret, sleazy getaway to Italy with his mistress, and he needed me in the office to make sure nobody got suspicious about why he was gone. The all hands on deck was a lie to cover his tracks. The devastation I felt quickly curdled into a white-hot, focused rage. He didn't just cancel my trip. He did it with a pathetic, insulting lie, using his authority over me to facilitate his own infidelity on the company's dime. He was going to be sipping wine in Milan while I was sitting in a cubicle, all because he couldn't be bothered to come up with a better cover story. In that moment, I decided he wasn't going to Milan. I played it cool for the rest of the day. Whenever he walked by, I put on a brave face, the loyal employee making a sacrifice for the good of the team. "Don't worry about it, Richard," I said with a tight smile. "We'll nail this project. I'll get my trip rescheduled." He bought it completely, probably relieved that I was being so compliant. He had no idea what was coming. I knew his flight was scheduled to depart at 8 p.m. the next day. I also knew company policy like the back of my hand. As the person who booked the travel, I was fully authorized to make changes or cancellations to the itinerary. The policy was designed for flexibility in case business plans changed. And boy, were plans about to change. I waited. I let him leave the office the next day, all smiles, telling everyone he was off to land a huge new client. I pictured him and his mistress in the taxi to the airport, giddy with excitement, their phones probably turned off. I wanted to time it perfectly for maximum impact. I waited until about 6:30 p.m. when I knew they would be at the airport, probably already through security, blissfully unaware as they browsed the duty-free shops. Then I logged into the corporate travel portal. My mouse hovered over Richard's itinerary. I took a deep, satisfying breath. Click. Cancel flight booking for Richard, last name and guest. This booking is non-refundable. Are you sure you wish to proceed? My finger slammed down on the confirm button. A moment later, an email popped into my inbox. Your flight cancellation is confirmed. A beautiful, beautiful message. But I wasn't done. I pulled up the hotel reservation. The presidential suite at a ridiculously opulent Milan hotel, booked for 7 nights, prepaid on the company card. Click. Cancel hotel reservation. Please note, this booking is within the 24-hour cancellation window and is 100% non-refundable. Excellent, I whispered to my empty office. I confirmed the cancellation. Next, the black car service I had arranged to pick them up from the airport in Milan. Click. Canceled. The dinner reservations I'd made for them at a famous restaurant. Click. Canceled. I systematically and meticulously dismantled every single part of their romantic Italian getaway. I was a digital ghost, erasing their trip from existence. My final act was to draft an email. I sent it to Richard, the head of our department, and the HR manager. Subject: urgent cost-saving measures. Our last name's trip to Milan. Team. Given the all-hands-on-deck critical project that required the last-minute cancellation of my own approved international travel, I took the proactive step of reviewing all non-essential departmental expenses scheduled for this week. It seemed prudent to ensure all resources were focused on this priority. As Mr. Last Name's trip to Milan appeared to be a conference with no clear client deliverables matching our current emergency, I have gone ahead and canceled all flights and hotel reservations to prevent unnecessary expenditure during this critical time. I am pleased to report that by acting quickly, I was able to save the company a significant amount of money. Please let me know if there's anything else I can do to help the team focus on this project. Best, Leah. I hit send. Then I packed my things, went home, and opened a bottle of wine that I was supposed to be saving for my trip. I can only imagine the scene at the airport. The confusion at the gate when their boarding passes wouldn't scan. The dawning horror at the ticketing counter as the agent informed them their reservation didn't exist. The frantic calls to the travel agency to me, calls that would go straight to voicemail. The argument that must have ensued between the two of them, standing there with their luggage and their shattered plans. His wife probably got a frantic call. The office definitely did. The whole sordid affair would have unraveled right there on the polished floors of the international terminal. The fallout at work on Monday was biblical. Richard didn't show up. An emergency meeting was called with HR and department leadership. My email was the primary piece of evidence. I was called in and I simply and calmly told the truth. Richard told me there was a critical project. He canceled my vacation for it. I took him at his word and acted accordingly to save the company money, just like a good employee should. My logic was flawless and my actions were, according to the travel policy, completely authorized. Richard was fired before he even had a chance to come back to the office to clear out his desk. He was terminated for misuse of company funds, gross misconduct, and lying to a direct report. His affair was public knowledge, and his career was in ruins. The best part, 2 weeks later, my new boss, the woman who replaced Richard, called me into her office. "Leo," she said, "I've reviewed the whole situation. What Richard did was unacceptable. Now I see you have 2 weeks of approved vacation time that you weren't able to use. Why don't you go ahead and book that trip to Italy? You've earned it." And I did. It was every bit as amazing as I had dreamed it would be. Now that is what you call justice. This story is just chef's kiss. It's a perfect storm of arrogance, opportunity, and impeccable execution. The boss, Richard, committed the ultimate sin of management. He abused his power over his employee's life for his own selfish, unethical personal gain. He didn't just cancel a trip. He showed a complete lack of respect for his employee as a human being. The beauty of Leo's revenge is its perfect, malicious compliance. He didn't hack anything or go rogue. He used the company's own systems and policies, and his boss's own lie, as the weapon. By framing his actions as a proactive, cost-saving measure in response to the emergency his boss invented, he made himself look like a model employee while simultaneously nuking his boss's career and personal life from orbit. It's a story that proves the old adage: play stupid, selfish games and win life-altering, humiliating prizes. And that's a wrap on some of the most catastrophic and, frankly, well-deserved corporate meltdowns we've ever seen. The common thread in all these stories is that the bosses weren't just mean, they were arrogant. They created the very traps they eventually fell into, all because they underestimated the people working for them. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the most effective way to win isn't to break the rules, but to follow them with absolute, malicious precision. Now I have to ask, what's the most brilliantly clever or satisfying case of malicious compliance you've ever witnessed? Let us all know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed these tales of corporate karma, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.